this module, we will examine protection against fires during the construction period. The information provided here will assist a broad range of people and organisations with responsibilities for fire safety on a construction site to reduce the risks from fire. The information applies to the design and planning stages as well as the actual construction phase, and many hazards can be addressed by good design and planning before they become an issue. In this presentation, we will overview the Wood Solutions Technical Design Guide number 20, Fire Precautions During Construction of Large Buildings, on which this particular module is based. Examine the NCC requirements for fire protection during construction and the requirements for the development and implementation of a specific project fire safety plan. We will look at a range of specific on-site fire prevention measures and discuss the key issues in relation to fire brigade intervention and site emergency procedures. Mid-rise timber buildings complying with the NCC 2016 DTS provisions provide a high level of fire safety. Key fire safety elements include fire sprinklers and fire protective coverings. In common with other types of construction, however, all fire safety measures may not be fully operational during the construction of a mid-rise timber building, potentially presenting an increased fire risk which needs to be addressed. To assist in providing guidance here, Wood Solutions has prepared Technical Design Guide number 20, entitled Fire Precautions During Construction of Large Timber Buildings. This document presents a number of strategies to reduce the fire risk during construction and includes a series of detailed chapters which are summarised in this module. While fires on construction projects are not common, they do pose a significant risk to both human safety and construction programs, so the risk needs to be actively managed. The National Construction Code addresses fire during construction with respect to initial firefighting attack by construction workers and water supplies for fire brigade intervention. But workplace health and safety, WHS, legislation and the normal duty of care also places additional responsibilities on designers, builders, owners, employers and other practitioners. WHS legislation requires the preparation of a written WHS management plan and also a fire safety plan, which may be based on detailed risk assessments. The fire safety plan should be comprehensive and cover all possible site contingencies. A selection of the key topics are listed here, and a number of these will be discussed in more detail in this module. In terms of the specific NCC requirements for protection against construction fires, under Part E1 Firefighting Equipment, Section EP 1.5, states that suitable means of firefighting must be installed to the degree necessary in a building under construction to allow initial fire attack by construction workers and for the fire brigade to undertake attack on the fire appropriate to A, the fire hazard, and B, the height the building has reached during its construction. NCC Part E1 Firefighting Equipment deemed to satisfy conditions under Section E1.9 also states that in a building under construction, A, not less than one fire extinguisher to suit Class A, B and C fires and electrical fires must be provided at all times on each storey adjacent to each required exit or temporary stairway or exit. And B, after the building has reached an effective height of 12 metres, 1. The required fire hydrants and fire hose reels must be operational in at least every storey that is covered by the roof or the floor structure above, except the 2 uppermost storeys, and 2. Any required booster connections must be installed. Looking at specific on-site fire prevention activities, the Technical Design Guide identifies the following key topics: fire safety awareness, training and compliance monitoring, security, control of ignition sources, and control of combustible materials. In regard to fire safety awareness, training and compliance monitoring, all people working on or visiting the site should be made aware of the importance of fire prevention and the content of the fire safety plan, including what to do in the event of a fire, the emergency procedures of the site, and location of the site assembly points. Training in relation to the use of portable firefighting equipment, safety precautions for those undertaking hazardous operations, and the site-specific emergency procedures must be provided appropriate to the role of the individual. Records should also be kept of fire safety training and inductions given to site personnel and visitors. Security is required on a construction site for many purposes. The main reason from a fire perspective, though, is to prevent arson, which is the single largest cause of fires on building sites. The fire safety plan should identify the required security measures, which may include erecting secure fencing around the perimeter of the site, securing access points such as entries to the construction zone, employing 24-hour security guards on larger sites supported by CCTV, storing combustible materials such as flammable liquids and gases and potential ignition sources in secure areas to limit access to materials that could be used to start a fire, illuminating the site so that unauthorised people on the site can be easily identified, installing intruder alarms in temporary buildings and storage areas as appropriate, and it can also be beneficial for security staff to be trained in the use of portable extinguishers, particularly if they are on site outside normal working hours. Controlling sources of ignition that can initiate fires or explosions is also a key fire prevention practice. Sources of ignition on a site can include hot works activities such as welding, brazing, soldering, grinding, cutting, oxyacetylene equipment, and thermal spraying, amongst others. These activities should be either avoided or a permit approach should be used. Electrical supplies and equipment can also be a potential ignition source during construction, and care is required in order to minimise this risk. All portable electrical devices and extension leads should be regularly inspected and tagged in accordance with state regulations, and any faulty or damaged equipment removed from use immediately. Smoking is a significant ignition source of fires on construction sites. Smoking restrictions should be applied throughout a construction site because hazardous materials such as flammable gases may be used in open as well as enclosed areas. Designated smoking areas should be provided on or adjacent to a construction site. Smoking restriction zones must be clearly identified, signposted and strictly enforced. Open fires, including the burning of waste materials, should be strictly prohibited on construction sites, and combustible waste materials should be regularly removed from the site. Plant equipment and vehicles should be located so that their exhausts discharge as far as practicable away from combustible materials. Fuel storage and service areas should not be located within structures under construction, alteration or demolition. Temporary heating equipment should also be avoided as far as reasonably practicable. Where it is to be used, an appropriate risk assessment should be undertaken. Controlling combustible materials is also a key fire prevention practice. Key areas here include stored and waste materials. In this regard, storage of combustible materials must be controlled, and where significant volumes of combustible building materials are to be stored on site, they should be stored in a secure area at least 10 metres away from any buildings or partially constructed buildings, and any location where hot works are undertaken. It is also important to remove any combustible waste materials, dust and debris from the building and its immediate vicinity at the end of each shift, or as soon as practicable, and store combustible materials before their disposal, as far from buildings as reasonably possible. Flammable liquids and gases require specific safety measures that address the risks of use in confined spaces and potential explosions, in addition to normal fire risks. Refer to the relevant state or territory WHS legislation and guidelines that address the use of these substances and necessary precautions. This category includes common fuels such as petrol and LPG, and acetylene used for cutting purposes. With waste garbage chutes, these, where possible, should be constructed of non-combustible materials and be located outside the building envelope. The accumulation of combustible materials close to the chute should be minimised as far as practicable. Exposed combustible construction materials during construction are also a key fact of life for mid-rise timber buildings. So let's look at this issue in a bit more detail. During the construction process, combustible construction materials will be temporarily exposed. Once the building is completed, however, these materials will not present a hazard because the required fire preventative coverings or treatments will have been applied, and all the required fire protective measures such as automatic sprinkler systems or compartmentation will have been installed. The following controls are suggested to protect combustible materials during construction. Exposed combustible materials should be progressively clad with fire preventative coverings so that the number of stories with significant exposed combustible materials is limited to 2 below the current construction level. The automatic fire sprinkler system should be progressively commissioned so that the number of unprotected stories with a significant exposed combustible materials is limited to 2 below the current construction level. Early installation of permanent or temporary fire compartments should be planned for, as these can limit fire spread in the event of an uncontrolled fire. Protection of door openings, windows, shafts and service penetrations also need to be addressed. A temporary alarm system should be provided. Sprinkler risers should be installed progressively as construction is undertaken. And hydrants and hose reels required by the National Construction Code for the completed building must be progressively commissioned as soon as reasonably practicable on all levels of a building under construction. Looking at fire brigade intervention and emergency procedures prevention, the technical guide identifies the following key topics. Liaison with fire authorities, which is critically important, so that the fire brigade has knowledge of the site before a fire emergency, therefore allowing a more effective response. A fire access, services and evacuation site plan should be prepared and agreed with the local fire brigade. Water supplies for adequate firefighting usage need to be maintained throughout the site as far as reasonably practicable. Fire brigade access also needs to be maintained to allow clear and unobstructed access at all times. Also, the fire brigade needs to be notified immediately of any changes or restrictions to the access points. And emergency procedures must be in a written form, displayed in prominent locations and given to all employees and visitors on site. So in summary, once completed, mid-rise timber buildings provide a high level of fire safety. However, during construction, all fire safety measures may not be fully operational, potentially presenting an increased fire risk which needs to be addressed. All projects should comply with the NCC requirements, and a specific and comprehensive fire safety plan covering all possible site fire-related contingencies should be developed and implemented. Key fire prevention areas should include fire safety awareness training and compliance, security on the site, control of ignition sources and control of combustible materials. Fire brigade intervention and emergency procedures prevention also need to be adequately addressed. For further information on wood and wood products, visit woodsolutions.com.au, the website for wood.